Welcome back. You're watching Global Today, and we continue with the conversation at pace. President William Ruto has sent condolences to families of army officers who perished after Kenya Air Force Huawei helicopter crashed in Lamu County. KDF said in a statement that the plane crashed on Monday night during air surveillance for the ongoing operation at Mani Boni, killing an unknown number of crew members. Condolences to the families and friends on the heartbreaking loss of our heroes in Lamu helicopter crash. We honor their bravery in defending and protecting Kenya's sovereignty, the president said in a statement Tuesday evening. Our prayers are with the Kenya Defense Forces and all those that have been affected by the tragedy. KDF said in a statement that a board of inquiry has been constituted and dispatched to the scene to establish the cause of crash. The leadership and the entire KDF fraternity condole with the families of crew. KDF Military Strategic Communications Head Brigadier Zipporah Kioko said, but did not reveal the number of officers who died in the crash. Operation Mani Boni was launched in September 2015, a year after terrorist attacks left over 90 people dead in Peketoni and property worth millions of shillings destroyed on the night of June 15, 2014. The operation covers the counties of Lamu, Tana River, Garissa, Kilifi, with the aim of flushing out Al-Shabaab militants believed to be hiding inside the dense Boni forest. The chopper crash came just a day after KDF officers killed 2 Al-Shabaab militants in the Bohei area within the expansive Boni forest. And on Thursday, September the 14th, top commanders visited troops stationed at Baure Forward operating base in Lamu County to assess the operation preparedness, welfare and morale of the troop. And of course, our prayers, our deepest sympathies and sincere also condolences are with the families of the affected soldiers who are doing a brave work right now. But all this really points out to the issue of Al-Shabaab, and we also remembering the 10th anniversary of Westgate. It was 4 days of hell for all Kenyans and also for journalists, especially the one who was on duty that particular day. I remember my colleague was actually the one who was reporting this at 1 o'clock. And even the psychological effect that journalists take away from this vicariously is a matter of concern sometimes. But let's just buckle down to that as we try and open up the space and just discuss, first of all, the issue of Al-Shabaab. ATMIS now is exiting from Somalia. There was amnesty on the Al-Shabaab. And we were to look at these pictures. Maybe you can tell us, even as we buckle down, what you were doing in Somalia, how the amnesty is, and who is this? It's good to know.
No, there I'm standing at the airport of Bisamarep, which is the capital of Garmadog, state.
Is an airstrip or airport?
Yeah, it's an airstrip, actually. Okay. It's an airstrip. But
in Somalia, it's an airport?
Well, anywhere in Africa. it's a good, airstrip. I was going for some consultations, and, well, that's why I was there. Definitely, I was not feeling insecure because I was... the security was taken care of. You can see that young man is mean enough to protect me. the vehicle there is also protection, so I don't think I was exposed at all, and I did not feel threatened at all.
So were you being fed with the Probox?
It's of course not Probox. There's another one behind us. Behind this is our security escort.
Okay.
It's there. It's armored, it's bulletproof, complete, and so on. I guess the point I wrote on Sunday basically about the trip, and I talked about what is happening in Somalia. And what is happening is that for the first time in the history of that country, you have a president who has made fighting Al-Shabaab his top priority. And he has decided to do so after watching, he had his first term, he has his predecessor, Farmajo, and now he has come back. There was the other one before, who had spent much of his time in Baidoa in the southwest. Yes. before coming to Mogadishu. And I think Hassan Sheikh said enough is enough. And he gave me a very interesting story. I mean, I've got a good, interesting story about the wisdom that led to this conclusion. That, you know, a Somali warrior came from the war. And unfortunately, he was hurt. He had an arrow stuck at his eyes, and another one at his behinds. And then the helper asked him, which do we remove first? And he said, the one at the buttocks, so that I can sit. so I thought it was important. So I think Hassan Sheikh decided that Somalia need to sit, so that they can now deal with other problems, because it has many other problems. But if you are to deal with the problems, you must sit. And sitting means removing Al-Shabaab. And therefore, it has become a priority. So last year, in June, he launched his campaign against Al-Shabaab. Now, this year, August 5th, he launched the second phase of that operation, what they are calling Operation Black Lion. And the essence of that operation is now to move south. And that, according to my argument, is that that's a really trying time, because we are moving to the more cosmopolitan, more ethnic Jubaland, which is also an area of geopolitical contestation between Kenya and Ethiopia. Both of them having different views. If you go with the previous analysis of what has been happening at Gendo, that part, the part of Jubaland state, and the battle for Kismayo between various clans, which sometimes you say that and people say, Prof, why are you saying that? It is true. It's a battle for Kismayo and the prosperity. Kismayo is potentially one of the largest ports, you know, in this region, and therefore the economic proceeds from it have elicited, you know, supremacy wars among clans. And how do you deal with this? Hassan Sheikh's strategy is to get the communities to own the war. Yeah. And by owning the war, they also need to hold the grounds for themselves. And therefore, he is working with the local militias and now increasingly with the local elite, including the political you know, leadership, the business leadership. And this is what I call the big tent approach. The big question is whether that big tent approach will work within the area, particularly of Jubaland and so on. But essentially, so far, he's succeeding. I think we need to bring on board people like Farmajo and others, because if given the political ambitions for the next election, I think it's important to bring everybody on board, and there's a will to do that. But we can confidently say that Al-Shabaab, for the first time in its history, is on the back foot. And because of that, the only way of showing that it is still alive and kicking is to attack the neighbors. So it has attacked Ethiopia. It is continuing to attack Kenya. You are going to hear it attacking Ethiopia. I mean, Uganda. Possibly you hear it in Mogadishu, I mean, Mozambique. But the whole reason is to announce to the world through its strategic communication strategy, I mean, a campaign, that it is a very strong, you know, regional fighting force. The problem also we have are the Middle East countries, some of them which are calling for negotiation, not for the purpose of solving Somalia's problem, but for the purpose of finding their own relevance globally. Because I don't think doors are closed for discussion with the people who want to renounce Al-Shabaab. Mukhtar is a minister in the government. He was a former Al-Shabaab leader. There are very many defectors, defecting by day and joining the government side, and also going back to their villages to do what they used to do in terms of business and day-to-day livelihoods. Yet, you know, people still want to insist that we must negotiate with this, with the militants. I think that's not the way to go. The idea is to kind of receive those who are from Al-Shabaab, let them join the society, and there's amnesty, or there has been amnesty in the past. There is a very strong and robust, you know, system of receiving those who are defecting, but and partners are helping in doing that. Yes.
But you see, that narrative that you cannot really negotiate with the militants or the terrorists is changing. Before, you never even gave him any time of day. But looking at the Taliban and what really happened with the US as well, they were on the negotiating table.
No, there was no negotiation. The Taliban took over. The idea that was negotiation was simply to cover face.
To cover face.
Yeah, the truth of the matter is the Taliban took over.
To sanitize.
Yeah, it was to sanitize.
Okay.
The Taliban took over Kabul, and there's no pretense.
Yes.
Yeah, Al-Shabaab, as it stands now, cannot even take over in any of the major Somali towns. Forget about Mogadishu. Okay. So it is nowhere comparable with the Taliban.
Thank you. We had Dr. You wanted to mention something on the youth bulge still.
I probably wanted to mention something small on the theme of the 4 days of Hell.
Yes.
And the suitability of the person who occupies the office of the Minister for Interior.
Yes.
And support what Professor Kawanja was talking about, that the problem of this incident was actually more political than touching on the office of the Minister for the Interior then. Because I have a feeling that the Minister then, Joseph Orelenko, was a very highly experienced manager who had been managing very serious institutions in hospitality for over 20 years. And issues of policy, issues of communication, and issues that touch on the coordination and management of events that are critical to this docket were not new to him. And if he wasn't suitable, then what made a professor of algebra more suitable than a manager of hospitality to be a minister for interior? Or what made a lecturer of literature, what Dr. Matiang was, more suitable as a minister for interior than Lenku, who was a manager of long-standing experience in coordinating and managing events. So that's why I think we need to put the record straight and say that the challenge then was political, not touching on the professional or the qualification of the man who occupied that docket then. And I think Professor Kawanja is privy to the intrigues of the time, and he has put the record straight.
Thank you.
That's what I wanted to mention. But quickly also add something to this Al-Shabaab debate. I think one other challenge that we are facing, Prof, is that we have not been able to take a regional approach in what one could call the fight against Al-Shabaab because of the geopolitical interests of the Horn of Africa. Different countries having, divergent interests. And now that Al-Shabaab is losing its roots at home, as Prof said, it will project itself to the world in these other regional countries. That now needs a more regional approach now than ever before to deal with this challenge. So the big brothers in the region, Kenya, Ethiopia, Uganda, and the rest of the countries need to appreciate that they need to go beyond their national interests and manage this crisis as a region.
Indeed. All right. And of course, what does it really portend when we have ATMIS pulling out? We understand the African Union peacekeeping force in Somalia has begun gradually withdrawing from the country in anticipation of Somali forces taking over security duties by end of 2024. AU forces have been deployed since 2007 to help the Somali government fight the Al-Shabaab militant group. But the fight is far from over, as Mohammed Sheikh Noor reports from Mogadishu.
After 16 years protecting government installations and land in South and Central Somalia, the African Union Peacekeeping Force, known since 2022 as the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia, or ATMIS, has started to withdraw from the country as national forces are expected to fill the role by the end of 2024. In June, 2,000 ATMIS soldiers were withdrawn, transferring 6 forward operating bases or FOBs to Somalia's national forces. In the next phase now underway, another 3,000 are expected to leave Somalia by the end of September. Lieutenant General Sam Okeding, the ATMIS force commander, says the drawdown has been gradual to prevent security vacuum.
It is not one move. If it was a one move, then we would say, no, things are going to be bad. But this one is orderly, from step by step.
National forces will be ready to replace ATMIS when 2 conditions are met, says Abdirahman Mohamed Tourieri, a former director of Somalia National Intelligence and Security Agency.
The first condition is that Somalia forces must be provided with the same level of assets and equipment as ATMIS. And the second condition is that the United Nations arms embargo imposed on Somalia must be lifted.
Although the Somali forces are considered ill-equipped, Ibrahim Hassan Haji, the Ministry of Defense's Director of Communications, has confidence in their ability.
As you may well know, Somali forces have occupied the forward operating bases vacated by ATMIS, and we believe that they are able to handle the control of these bases.
Hassan Sheikh, a political analyst and former advisor to Somali president, would like to see a more autonomous Somalia after ATMIS fully withdraws.
The African Union has long been providing assistance to the country and its people. And when they withdraw from Somalia, the Somali people will need to take responsibility for their own affairs, form the national government, and unite with it to ensure its protection with Somali power and resources, rather than foreign funds.
The African Union peacekeeping mission has been in Somalia since 2007, supporting the Somali government in combating the Al-Shabaab insurgencies. In spite of this, Al-Shabaab's war is not over as the group continues to hold towns, villages and remote areas.
And of course, you can see the East African has a very laid out details on this and what it does really portend. EA braces for war on terror as ATMIS exits as the African mission in Somalia leaves. The troops are carrying with them the continual burden of fighting Al-Shabaab terror activities across the region. Well spread out for you on page 4 and 5 of the East African this week. What does it really portend? And we say that ATMIS exits now spreads burden of fighting Shabaab to neighbors. We'll get more burden on this as well. And this is how AMISON at full strength in 2019, 20,674. Those were the soldiers deployed. Uganda, as you can be, or that particular source from ATMIS illustrates, Uganda was leading with their forces in Somalia, followed by Burundi, also Ethiopia as well, and Kenya standing at 3,664. Djibouti with a list 960. And you've had from this is in phases. So does it make any discernible difference if it's in phases? At the end of the day, also the enemy is watching how they're facing out slowly by slowly. And is it true that now we've clamped down on the rise of terrorists or Al-Shabaab, especially in the Lamu region, where we've seen also from social media how they're blowing up every which way some of the military vehicles right there. So we just want to put this into perspective moving forward. What shoulder are we meant to, of course, what burden are we meant to shoulder as far as fighting Al-Shabaab is concerned here in the country? We were the first out of the gate, Dr. Hassan Kanenje, to deploy in 2010, right? Was it 2012 or 2011? Yes. And it was Operation Linda Inchi. And up to now, we're still in Somalia. So if the cover of ATMIS is lifted, we shoulder the burden of putting our soldiers or having our boots on the ground still? Tell us more.
The Kenyan military and security still have the obligation to Linda Inchi. And so I expect that the country is going to do whatever necessary that it must do to be able to protect the country. Now, the first withdrawal, of course, is different from precipitous withdrawal like what we saw in Afghanistan, and it led to Talibanization of Afghanistan, and of course, right now, we're having Taliban back in Kabul. And first withdrawal is strategic, is to ensure that the gains have been made are preserved, but also that the vacuums are not created in ways that can be exploited by terror organizations. The challenge I think we face, and what is likely to happen still, is despite I think the confidence and optimism by the Somali national government and Somali army, part of it is also driven by the patriotic spirit that you want to be able to portray a degree of strength. Somalia is not completely prepared to secure its territory. First, just based on what happened last year before the new president came to power, you saw the kind of conflict that took place in Mogadishu. And the entire security framework literally became fractured along clan and sectional lines, or rather factional lines. And that was telling, because it means we've not been able to build a sense of nationhood within the security sector. That's something that needs to be built. Secondly, we've all heard about the potential of Somalia, and we know about the potential of Somalia. But look at its budget in 2023. It's tiny. It's probably less than $1 billion for a whole country. Where is it going to get the money to be able to run security in the entire country? And Somalia is not a very small place. I do agree with sentiments expressed by the minister that the embargo that was imposed in Somalia at some point needs to be lifted, or else they cannot be able to procure the kind of equipment needed to replace AMISOM. But secondly and fundamentally, Somalia's institutions need to be built to be able to bring some kind of confidence among the citizens. The areas being liberated, the country is still economically very, very weak. In terms of institutions, they're still extremely weak. And so, granted, ATMIS is supposed to be providing a supporting role. It's not exactly the mandate for ATMIS changed. It's different from AMISOM. I think people conflict the two.
We conflict the two, yeah.
Yes, and exactly the same. So the mission is different, and sometimes you can be blaming ATMIS not doing A, B, C, D. No, that is not within the current mandate to do a lot of stuff. It's provide technical support to the government and assist in the transition process. But we're not out of the woods. Now, it is likely that Somalia will gain membership in the East African community probably within the next 12 months. Of course, that means we're going to take ownership of the Somali problems. And so I do agree, a regional approach is important. Now, for those of us who work in this space, today, regional thinking is a lot more closer than it was before. We've always had different understanding of the problem of, for instance, of terrorism. But increasingly, I think there's recognition, especially among IGAD countries, of the kind of challenge that the Al-Shabaab as well as ISIS is posing to the region. So what we hope is that that understanding is followed and matched by investment, so that we don't overwhelmingly rely on foreign partners to fund our own security, that we actually own our own security. Now, Kenya has taken that leading role in Eastern DRC. But I think part of the challenge for government will be to explain to citizens the necessity of actually investing in regional security, because that means Kenya is going to shoulder a little bit more. Now, one thing I foresee happening in Somalia is probably we may have a different force under a different name to be able to assist and offer support to the Somali government as well as National Army to ensure that the menace of Al-Shabaab do not recur. Because while they've been pushed in most places, they're still present in the hinterland, and the ideology and infrastructure of Al-Shabaab has not been completely eliminated. That is going to take years, if not decades, to be able to reverse and go back to a place where Somalia did not have terror organizations.
All right, looking at the list, Tanzania is the one which has not really deployed, or maybe you can educate me on this as well, in the ATMIS. And was there any rhyme or reason why we never had Somalia also, the boots on the ground Tanzania in Somalia, the boots on the ground?
Well, I don't know, because I'm not a government employee, but I think partly Tanzania's history has been a bit different from other countries. As you know, Tanzania contributed to the liberation from colonialism and oppression in south of our continent. Tanzania has been seen always as a neutral arbiter when it comes to issues relating to international relations. So I'm speculating here. I don't really have first-hand information. But I think the war, if I can use the term, the war on terror will only be won. It's a war of hearts and minds. And it's not a military objective. And we know that the term or the label terrorism can also be misused. It can be used to, demoralize and sideline individuals that you believe are your competitors. So I'm careful when we talk about this. But I think, as Hassan said, at least now we have some sort of an understanding on the counterterrorism strategies approach. So we have, for example, the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy that provides 4 pillars, okay? And if you look at these 4 pillars, they are addressing this heart and mind question. So pillar number 1 is to address the conditions that foster terrorism. And one of these conditions is the perception of marginalization. We talked about the economic issue. Some individuals believe that they are marginalized in society. They don't benefit from the larger pie of a nation. And these sentiments drive some individuals to take upon these so-called terroristic strategies. Pillar number 2 is on the prevention now, how to combat terrorism, making sure that there is a capacity building in building strategies around how to respond to it. And the last pillar for me is very important because it talks about the respect for human rights for all and the rule of law as a fundamental basis for fighting terrorism. I think we are going to get there. I think Tanzania as a country has played its role. And the interesting thing is that Tanzania has a larger community of Tanzanians who are of Somalian descent. I have always thought that, and in all these countries, all these East African countries, we have citizens of these countries who are of Somali descent, and they are reputable individuals within those societies. Why can they be used to be ambassadors to go and talk to their brothers in Somalia and try to find out ways how to resolve this problem? So I think I am very optimistic that we will be able to address the question.
Fantastic. Let's hear from Peter Kagwanja or Dr. Kenombogi. You've commented already. I've lost my track of thought.
I think we finished that.
We never did hear from Dr. Ken on the issue of the ATMIS now wrapping up in Somalia.
Well, as I said just before we went to the other side, is yes, wrapping up is necessary, but we also need to recognize the changing faces of the problem we define as Al-Shabaab. And at the stage where we are, I will only emphasize that we need to appreciate the multi-regional approach that is required to sort out this challenge. And the multi-regional approach will be able to recognize that the problem of Al-Shabaab is just not in Somalia, but in all these other regions that are close by. And the whole region that we describe as the Horn of Africa, much more loose understanding of that concept, needs to be on a high alert and see that perhaps we constitute what we call the last push towards sorting out this problem that has bedeviled the region for decades.
It did. All right, we want just to come back home and also try and look at a very rising contentious issue that is happening in Mombasa, where we have the county governor, Abdul Sumad Nasir, blasting the national government for wanting to privatize the port of Mombasa. Speaking during the launch of the offshore fishing boat at Old Port Forodhani area in the Mvita constituency, the Mombasa governor said enough is enough, and that the Mombasa and coast leadership won't accept the move.
Hatuwezi kubebwa kifalafala na bandari. Ni lazima tujue feasibility gani ilofanywa kuonesha ya kwa hii bandari ya kwa leo wanataka kuibinafsisha. Kwa nini wasiende kubinafsisha Kenya Airways ili ndege nyingine zije kuingia hapa Mombasa? Tukianza kuzungumza habari ya ndege kuweza kutua katika Mombasa, tunaambiwa ya kwa Kenya Airways inaangaliwa, lakini leo wanataka kubinafsisha Kenya Ports Authority. Ukienda katika sehemu ambazo kwamba zenye kukuza miwa, viongozi wameweza kushikana. Wana Mombasa, nisikizeni na nisikizeni kwa makini, na yakisi mimi yale ambayo kwamba mko nayo nyinyi. Mkiona ya kwa kaunti ya Mombasa imeajiri vijana, mkiona ya kwa tunajaribu kila njia, mkiona ya kwa bei ya leseni tumeweza kuipunguza, mkiona ya kwa ile fedha ya kulipwa na tuktuk na matatu tumeweza kupunguza, sio kwa sababu hatuhitaji fedha, lakini in the laws of economics there is the principle of diminishing returns. Ukachukua ile tauli ukaitia katika maji, ikamue vile utakavyoikamua, lakini mwisho ukaikamua zaidi, itakatika ile tauli, haitoi tena maji.
What does it really portend as far as privatizing the port and security is concerned? Other jurisdiction we've discussed on this forum, and of course elsewhere as well, that is still a very contentious catnip issue in Tanzania as well. But let's just begin with you, Professor. On the flip side of it, they decry the fact that there was no public participation, there was no consultancy that was done. So this is sort of an ambush, and there is a hostile takeover, as they will say in business.
First, let's since you mentioned Tanzania, and my brother, Professor, was talking about Tanzania, we must really talk about the elephant in the room.
Which is?
And the elephant in the room is that Tanzania need to make up its decision. Yes, we know, ideologically it was inclined to be southern because of the so-called frontline states. That's the issue of the past. But Tanzania politically hangs to Southern Africa. And economically, it is within the Eastern Africa region. And when we were doing the strategy for countering violent extremism in the region, Tanzania was an integral part of that broad strategy. So and the problems that Tanzania, whether it's Zanzibar or the mainland, has been facing with the terrorism is the same as everybody else in the region. It's not unique. In fact, the northern part of Mozambique, which is very close to Tanzania, also is facing the same problem. Eastern Congo and the countries in the Great Lakes region, which are very, very close to Tanzania, are facing the same region. So Tanzania looks like, you know, it has to make up its mind. Its soul is in SADC. And its body is in the East African community. It needs to reconcile its soul and body so that it can function well. It's an East African power. It's not a Southern Africa power, to the best of my knowledge. I know there are very many advantages of being affiliated to larger economies like South Africa. But Tanzania has the potential of being one of the largest economies in the region, given its resources, given its geographical proximity, and also given the kind of leadership, the stability of leadership that Tanzania has enjoyed over the last 60 or so years. So if it makes its mind and reconcile its soul and its body, Tanzania is going to be a major power. So I am sending my brother to our sister Suruhu to find a solution to Tanzania's. Suruhu must lazima apate suruhu for Tanzania because the soul and the body must be one. You cannot keep on, we have that voodoo story in Haiti, and I hope, okay, where you wake up at the middle of the night, not you but your soul, to go and cultivate in somebody's land. Then in the morning you are so tired, you wonder what have you been doing?
You've been cultivating.
You have been cultivating. So Tanzania is cultivating South Africa instead of during the night. So that's on a lighter note.
Professor Sungi, you want to defend?
No, on the lighter note, I also wanted to respond. I think that's not the case. I believe that, again, we can spend many hours talking about these issues related to international relations. But I think Tanzania has its own strategic national interests, and every country will make sure that those interests are exploited to the fullest. I'm of the view that Tanzania is playing its role very carefully. Again, going back to the history of the country itself and the founding father of the country, Mwalimu Nyerere. So I think that there are those dynamics, but I don't think that Tanzania leans more to SADC and less to the East African community. I don't think that's the case.
All right, let's get a bit of history from Dr. Mbugi as well.
I think as Prof speaks and the other colleague, it reminded me of what my teacher of African International Relations, Professor Koro Adar, used to say in the 90s, that Tanzania has a knack to eat from both sides. It seems like it is in its national interest to belong both to the ESC and both to SADC and eat from both sides. But it would, I think, be better if it focused.
But isn't that wisdom?
Yeah.
Right. Don't put your eggs in one basket.
Well, but even Kenya is in IGAD. I mean, countries are in different regional blocks. So I don't think by itself is a problem. The problem is what are these countries, what are their roles? What are their roles? Are they playing a positive role in development, in all these issues that we're talking about, counterterrorism? Are they doing it?
Well, you're right. But I think Tanzania has been a special case for years. That even when you look at the development of the East African community too, and the slow pace with which it has taken, probably Tanzania will be at the center if you are explaining why we have not managed to really get some things working from a number of angles. So I think what we need to appreciate is that, yes, each and every country has its own interests and they have ways of pursuing that. But when we look at the development of what initially we thought as the Federation of East Africa and why we have not gotten where we wanted to get, I think the politics involving Tanzania, especially with its relationship with Nairobi, may be at the center if you wanted to explain the slow pace at which the development of the East African community has taken. So it has more to do with the geopolitics of the region. And the apparent competition between Dar es Salaam and Nairobi,
Thank you.
Where I have a feeling, I stand to be corrected, that there is a phobia of Kenya in Dar es Salaam.
I think we're being diplomatic.
Could we hear from Dr. For the interest of time, then we'll come to you briefly from Dr. Kanenje.
Well, when I watched the exchange between these two able professors, it reminded me that I think Nyerere and Kenyatta just been reborn. They're back. We're back in the 70s, you know? Yes. Yes. This is what I would say, and I don't want to get too much into it because my colleagues have already spoken. The pursuit of national interest has to reflect also the real benefits that actually accrue to the people. So if you're pursuing a national interest that does not benefit the people, then that national interest is misguided, and therefore it has to be reviewed, you see. And so I think all the countries in the region need to re-examine or go and to look at the national interests, the way they're defined, whether in the 70s, because sometimes they're not exactly the same, because the world has been changing. And so what do we need to do? But I ultimately believe that more integration is better than isolation.
All right, do you want to say something, Professor?
Yes, I agree with what Professor Sungi is saying, that countries pursue their national interest. It is true. But I have lived in the two countries. I've lived in South Africa. I've lived in Kenya. There was a time I was studying SADC more than I was studying in the East African community. And now that I'm on this side, I'm studying the East African community. Let me tell you, Tanzania is such a central figure in the SADC community than it is in the East African community. In fact, attending the East African community meetings is more like just a routine rather than that pull. Yet it is such a paradoxical, because for Tanzanian goods to go to South African market, they have to go 2,000 plus kilometers to reach the South African market. Forget about Botswana market. You have not even reached Angolan market, which would now be almost 3,000 kilometers and so on and so forth. So it's economically doesn't make sense. Whereas for Tanzanian eggs to reach the Nairobi, it's by truck, one truck from Arusha to Nairobi. The Tanzanian kids are coming to school here. Everybody. You go to Tanzania, Kenyans are in the hotels industry of Tanzania thanks to utalii and what they have done. All the hotels are manned that way. We are integrated economically. We are integrated as a people. We speak the same language. We are integrated as people who were colonized by the British and have the same experience and so on. And we share heroes. Nyerere is a hero to many Kenyans. I don't know how many kids are called Nyerere in this republic. Very many. And so on. So Madam Suluhu President Suluhu looks like she's more of an East African. You can tell she's more of an East African, and therefore we are very, very hopeful that she's going to bring Tanzania back.
Right, thank you. Well, let's get our closing remarks, beginning with you, Dr. Sungi. Just looking forward, what will be your overarching issue right now? The United Nations General Assembly is still on. Sentiments are coming from there. We've not discussed that, but I think it will be wise of us to do that after the conference itself or the assembly.
For me, for this week is President Ruto's debut in the General Assembly. I think President Ruto enjoyed the successful African Climate Summit that was held in Nairobi. He got a mention from President Biden. All these may seem small things, but they are big things politically. It puts Kenya in the global map. It also would have a contribution to Kenya's economy. So I think President Ruto has started well as far as international relations is concerned. He's shown that he understands the issues. He can clearly articulate the issues. And I hope this will trickle down or create a better interpretation inside Kenya.
Right.
I think we need to teach the Americans how to pronounce the name of our president. It's not Ruto.
It's Ruto.
It's not Ruto. It is Ruto. There's a very strong, powerful T. So Biden need to be told. I mean, possibly because I'm saying this because we go to laboratory classes. Yes. When we go to America to study, they take you to the laboratory to pronounce things the way they pronounce. So we should open a laboratory for the Americans to pronounce our names. They used to go Kenyara. Then Ruto. It's not making sense. But anyway, the good thing is that our president is basically putting the country on the map. That cannot be denied. He's doing extremely well on that account. But something needs to be mentioned because we have almost ignored the statements by Nasir, the governor of Mombasa. Let me say this and stop. That there are certain institutions that are not for privatization because they were not in the first place meant to make profit. Railways are not built to make profit. Our airlines are not to make profit. Our ports are not to make profit. They are to link our economy, because without them, we will not be having an economy. When you privatize them, then you've lost it.
Thank you.
Completely.
Thank you. All right, Dr. Karanja, briefly.
Yeah, from port of Mombasa to the port of Sudan. Yes, I have to talk about it in part because it had been one of the most peaceful places in the recent months, which has now imploded, and that means it's going to be harder for Sudanese to get out. But what is fundamental, that's coming to our desk this week, is it's been reported that Ukrainian special forces have conducted 8 drone strikes against RSF, which means the conflict in Europe has actually reached Africa in a very hot way. Now, I would like to invite those who pay attention. We are organizing actually a conference on Sudan next week, and I think as Africans regionally, we need to see how we can effectively intervene there, because if we don't, and considering now you're having actively foreign forces engaged in the Sudan theater, is going to mess up this region, and we'll have ourselves to blame. So we need to do something about it.
Dr. Ken.
Yeah. From Sudan, from Mombasa, let's come to Nairobi. I agree with my colleagues that our president has done well in his Pan-African agenda and also the pursuit of Kenya's foreign policy. Domestically, however, I think he needs to appreciate the fact that his honeymoon as a president is over. And there are things that needs to be addressed today, and that is the youth unemployment. If there is something that we should be careful about, if there's something that we need to think seriously about, is how we are keeping, or we are going to keep our young people busy. If we don't, then there is a revolution coming. Some people seem to suggest that we are such a ethnicized country that we cannot sustain a revolution, which is a lie. The fact that President Ruto could come to power by galvanizing the country in through the prism of class, mainly, as opposed to ethnicity, it says something.
Right, thank you.
Let's deal with the youth unemployment.
Thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate your input this morning. Very interesting, incisive, and profound on issues to do with foreign policy, diplomacy, and security as well. Thank you also for your valid company. Before we go, just briefly, I just wanted to show you what we do have on the front pages of the week. This is what is on the front page of the week. Currently, we can see the debate has been on the Beijing and China spying on UK, a threat to British democracy. It's a probing question there. And you can see Xi Jinping there. He's actually the chief spy, as you can see it there. That is currently, and also Sanctuary City Blues, why a surge in asylum seekers has Democrats thinking immigration lastly, and also the Time magazine as well. A very interesting discussion that also